She was sitting alone on a cracked bench in the snow shoulders, trembling eyes downcast. When he approached with quiet concern, she didn't meet his gaze. She just whispered, "It hurts when I sit." The rest of the town looked away. But one man didn't. If you believe in the quiet power of kindness and love that begins where pain once lived, then this story is for you. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe. These are the stories that remind us, sometimes, the smallest act of compassion becomes the miracle someone's been waiting for. The wind screamed through the narrow streets of North Haven like it carried a warning. Owen Blake tightened his grip on the steering wheel as snow pelted the windshield, fierce and blinding. His old pickup groaned in protest against the cold, the heater spitting weak warmth. In the passenger seat, his 9-year-old son, Noah, leaned toward the glass eyes squinting through the flurries. "Dad, is that someone sitting on the bench?" Owen slowed to a crawl, heart sinking as the silhouette emerged. A girl huddled on the splintered bench across from the school's old fence. No coat. Just a pale sweater soaked through, clinging to her like frostbite. Her arms were wrapped around herself. Her head hung low. "Stay in the truck," Owen said, voice firm. He stepped into the storm. Snow soaked his jeans in seconds as his boots crunched toward the girl. The bench was cracked down the middle, and yet she sat on its edge, as if afraid to rest her full weight. She didn't look up. Miss Owen crouched beside her, careful not to startle. "You shouldn't be out here like this. It's 15 degrees. The girl blinked. Her lips were blue. Her jaw trembled, not just from cold, from something deeper. "I'm not supposed to talk to men," she whispered. The voice was so faint, Owen barely caught it. It wasn't just the storm trying to silence her. It was fear. He shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched. "I'm Owen," he said softly. "My son goes to that school. I run the blacksmith shop near the diner. I'm nobody dangerous, just a guy who doesn't like seeing people freeze to death." For a moment, she said nothing. Then her voice barely audible above the wind. "It hurts when I sit." Owen's breath caught, not because he didn't understand, but because he did. He didn't ask what she meant, didn't push. Just reached into his coat pocket and handed her a packet of tissues and a still warm thermos of cocoa he'd packed for Noah. "What's your name?" he asked. "Harper," she replied, still not meeting his gaze. "Harper. Okay." Owen nodded slowly. "I'm not going to ask questions you don't want to answer. But if you ever need a place to sit that doesn't hurt, my shop's got an old wood stove and a decent chair. Door's always open." He turned to leave, then stopped. Something in him, something buried under years of silence and survival, refused to walk away. So he turned back and said low and clear, "Pain's not a sin, but ignoring it sure is." Harper looked up for the first time. Her eyes, bruised, hollow, but not broken, met his. And for a second, something passed between them. A flicker of recognition, of truth. Later that day, Owen dropped Noah at school and returned to the bench with tools in hand. The wood was split down the middle, a jagged crack that mirrored the silence in Harper's voice. He knelt beside it and worked, replacing slats, sanding edges, adding a layer of varnish against the snow. When he finished, he reached into his toolbox and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. He taped it to the underside of the bench out of sight. It read, "For the ones who never got to speak." The next morning, Harper returned, not to sit, just to stand and look. She ran her fingers along the new wood, found the note, read it once, twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the pocket of her worn skirt. She didn't smile, but her hand stopped shaking. That evening, Owen was hammering horseshoes in the back of his shop when the bell over the front door jingled. He turned, expecting a customer. Instead, Harper stood there, wet snow dripping from her hood. Owen's old jacket still clutched around her like armor. "You said the stove was warm," she said. I wanted to see if you meant it." Owen nodded and gestured toward the armchair near the wood stove. Harper walked to it but hesitated before sitting. She touched the armrest with fingers, like feathers, as if the chair might vanish. When she sat, she winced, but only slightly. "You fix benches?" she asked quietly. "I fix what's broken," he replied. Even when people say it's not your place, Owen met her eyes, especially then. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them like an unspoken pact. Noah appeared from the back room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Dad, who's this? Is Harper?" Owen said gently. "She's staying warm." Noah Ever, his father's son, simply nodded. "You want the quilt? It's softer." Harper blinked, stunned. No one had asked her what she wanted in a long, long time. She nodded, and Noah disappeared, returning with a faded patchwork blanket. As she wrapped it around her, Harper whispered, "Your son's kind." "He had a good teacher," Owen said, staring into the fire. Harper didn't ask who, but she saw the pain in his jaw. The kind of pain that doesn't come from injury, but from memory. Outside, the snow piled high. Inside, for the first time in years, someone sat and wasn't hurting alone. And for Owen Blake, who had once failed to speak up when it mattered most. This time, he had listened, and it had changed everything. By morning, the bench was buried in white. Owen stood at the window of his workshop, coffee in hand, watching the snow fall heavy and deliberate. Behind him, the fire in the old cast-iron stove crackled softly. The silence was welcome. Silence, Owen had learned, wasn't always empty. It could hold truth, reflection, even healing. But this morning, it held something else. A question. Harper had left before dawn. The chair where she sat last night was still faintly indented. She hadn't said much, didn't need to. The silence between them had been enough. Noah shuffled in, hair tousled, holding the quilt she'd used. "Dad," he said, "is she okay?" Owen glanced at him. 9 years old, and already asking the right questions. "I don't know," Buddy Owen answered honestly. "But I think she's trying to be." By noon, word had started to travel. First at the diner, where old Mrs. Henderson whispered over biscuits about a girl seen walking out of Owen Blake's shop at dawn, wearing a man's jacket. Then, in the church basement, where the women's ministry sipped lukewarm tea and muttered about fallen girls and unwise attachments. By sundown, it had made its way to Reverend Elias Wynne. "Tell me again what you saw." His voice was calm, but it carried that edge Harper knew too well. His hand rested on the family Bible, thick and leather-bound, like a gavel waiting to fall. The teenage boy across from him, Peter Grant, a youth choir member and notorious tattler, shifted nervously. "She was just sitting in his truck, Reverend. I saw her. With Mr. Blake. And she had his coat." Elias's jaw clenched. He turned to Harper, who stood quietly by the doorway. "Is it true?" Harper didn't look at him. "I was cold. That's not an answer." She swallowed. "Yes. I sat in his truck, just for a few minutes." Elias stood, slowly, like a storm forming in human shape. "After everything I've done for you, Harper. The roof over your head, the food, the schooling. And you repay that by consorting with a man like that. A man whose wife couldn't handle the shame of her own scandal." Harper winced. She'd heard the whispers about Owen's late wife, how she'd been too soft, too progressive, too quick to give up. They never said the word suicide, but they didn't have to. "She didn't deserve that," Harper said, barely above a whisper. "What did you say?" "She didn't deserve to be treated that way," Harper said again, louder now. "And neither do I." The slap came fast, but not unexpected. just hard enough to sting, just soft enough not to leave a bruise. Elias Wynne was a master at discipline that left no evidence. But this time, Harper didn't cry. She looked him straight in the eye and whispered the same sentence she'd whispered to Owen. "It hurts when I sit." Elias stared at her. For a moment, just a moment, his face betrayed something, fear, maybe. The beginning of panic. "Go to your room," he ordered, voice brittle. Harper turned and walked, not ran, up the stairs. Her hands were trembling, but inside her chest something had shifted. A small, smoldering spark. Owen didn't expect to see her that night. He figured the storm, the gossip, the weight of her world would keep her locked behind the pastor's pristine white fence. But just after 10 p.m., there was a knock on his workshop door. She stood there in the snow, coatless again, hair-soaked eyes red, but not from tears. From fire. "I only came to say one thing," Harper said. Owen stepped aside. She didn't enter. "I know what people are saying. About me. About you." "I don't care what they say about me," Owen replied. "Never have." "Well, I do," she snapped, and then stopped herself. "Or I did, for years. But not anymore." A beat passed. "I'm not going back there," she said, finally. "But I don't know where else to go." Owen looked at her snowflakes caught in her hair, shoulders hunched like she expected to be turned away. He opened the door wider. "I'm not offering charity," he said. "Just a chair that doesn't hurt." That night, Harper slept in the spare room Owen hadn't opened since his wife passed. The room smelled faintly of cedar and memories. She touched nothing, just curled up under the quilt and stared at the ceiling. In the next room, Owen sat beside the fire staring at an old photograph of his wife. She was smiling barefoot on the porch, sunlight in her hair. "You would have taken her in too," he whispered. "You always saw the ones no one asked about." At dawn, Harper made breakfast. Nothing fancy, just eggs and toast, but it startled Owen nonetheless. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," Harper replied. "But I want to." Noah beamed as he took a seat. "You make better eggs than Dad." Owen chuckled. "He's not wrong." Harper smiled. A real one this time. "It's strange," she said. "Sitting and not hurting." "Strange doesn't mean bad," Owen said. "Sometimes it just means new. But peace in a town like North Haven doesn't last long when someone starts asking the wrong questions. And Harper, she was finally ready to ask them all. Not for herself, but for every girl the town had seen and turned away from. The snow had begun to melt, but the cold still clung to the bones of North Haven like regret. The bench, once broken and splintered, now stood sturdy in the pale winter light. Owen had worked quietly on it every afternoon after Harper's first visit. Not because it needed to be fixed, but because she needed it to be whole. Because something about that cracked wood had mirrored her silent, weathered, and holding on by threads. Now it was solid, smooth, waiting. Harper stood in front of it the next morning, gloved fingers grazing the polished armrest. She didn't sit. She hadn't sat on any bench in public since she was 13. But today, she didn't flinch when her coat brushed against the wood. Behind her, Owen leaned on the frame of his truck, coffee in hand. "I thought you'd want to see it before the town starts using it again," he said. "I thought they'd burn it down," Harper murmured. Owen shrugged. "They might. But it won't change what it was meant for." She looked at him, then eyes narrowing slightly. "Why do you keep doing this, helping me? Fixing things that aren't yours to fix?" Owen held her gaze. "Because I didn't the last time." Harper tilted her head. She didn't need to ask what he meant. "I didn't stand up when my wife needed me to," he said quietly. "I let her carry things alone, and it cost everything. You think helping me makes that right?" "No," he said simply. "But it makes me different." They stood there in silence, wind rustling the pine trees that lined the road. Then Harper reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She hesitated before handing it to him. "I wrote something," she said. "For the bench." Owen unfolded it. The handwriting was small and precise, the ink slightly smudged, for the ones who sat in silence and the ones who finally stood. Owen blinked. He folded the note carefully and tucked it beneath the bench's seat behind a hidden panel he'd carved himself. "That's where it belongs," he said. With the truth. Later that afternoon, the town stirred. Mrs. Lorna Bell Northaven's unofficial gossip queen and part-time librarian stopped by the shop under the pretense of needing a gate latch repaired. She looked around, as if expecting to catch Harper hiding behind the anvil. "I heard she's still here," Lorna said, smiling like a cat who smelled blood. Owen didn't respond. He simply took the latch from her hands and set it on the work table. Lorna leaned closer. "You know, folks are beginning to ask questions about what kind of man harbors a girl like that. One with no family, no guidance. It makes people uncomfortable." Owen looked up slowly. "Good," he said. "Maybe discomfort will finally make them pay attention." Lorna straightened, flustered. "She's not your responsibility, Owen. She's not anyone's burden either." Lorna scoffed and left in a storm of perfume and indignation. Harper emerged from the back room a moment later, hands still dusted in flour from baking bread with Noah. "I heard all of that," she said. "I figured," Owen replied. "Do you want me to leave?" Owen looked at her, then really looked at the faint bruise on her wrist, the pink on her cheeks returning the steadiness in her shoulders that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. "No," he said. "I want you to stay. But more than that, I want you to stop asking permission to exist." Harper's breath hitched. She turned away, blinking fast. "You say things like that, and I don't know what to do with them." "Just let them sit," he said gently. "Like the bench." That night, Harper returned to the bench alone. She sat. Slowly. Carefully. It still hurt, but not in the same way. A different ache now, one she could name. Freedom. The next morning the bench was gone, ripped out at the bolts, the letter beneath it torn and scattered. No one admitted to it, but everyone knew. "I'll build another one," Owen said. Jaw clenched, Harper stood beside him, arms crossed. "And they'll tear that one down, too. Then I'll build 2. She turned to him, anger rising behind her eyes. "You don't get it. They don't hate the bench, Owen. They hate what it means." Owen paused. "No," he said. Finally. "They fear what it means." Harper sat at the kitchen table that night staring at the scraps of her letter Owen had gathered from the snow. They were torn, but the words hadn't been erased. Not really. Noah climbed into the chair beside her. "Can we make a new one?" "A new bench?" she asked. "No. A new letter." Harper stared at the boy's wide, honest eyes. Then she smiled. "Yeah, kiddo. We can make a new letter." By the end of the week, a new bench stood in front of Owen's shop. But this time it was different. On the backrest, carved carefully into the wood, were words no one could rip away. A place to sit without shame. People walked by. Some scoffed. Some paused. Some read and turned away. But one woman, quiet, older eyes glassy, sat down gently and exhaled like she hadn't in years. Owen and Harper watched from the porch. "That's the start," he said. Harper nodded, arms folded over her chest. "It still hurts," she murmured. "But now, it also heals." And for the first time since she was a child, she didn't whisper those words. She owned them. Sunday morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of morning that made Northaven look innocent. The streets were quiet, the snow freshly swept, and the white steeple of the church rose like a symbol of decency against a clear sky. But Harper Wynne knew better. She stood at the edge of the sidewalk, hands in her pockets, watching people filter into the sanctuary, smiles, coats, gloves, Bibles in hand. They greeted one another with warm eyes and colder intentions. No one looked her way, but she felt every glance that tried not to land on her. Owen was across the street hammering a horseshoe into shape at his forge. Sparks danced around his boots, his arms steady, jaw set. When he finally looked up and saw her, she didn't wave, didn't smile. She just nodded. He nodded back. It was enough. Later that afternoon, Reverend Elias Wynne stood in the center of the church hall, hands clasped, surrounded by a circle of church elders. The conversation was thinly veiled concern, masked as piety. "I've had 3 families ask if their daughters are safe," in choir murmured Deacon Barnes. "She's living with a man," hissed Clara June, the piano teacher. "A man whose wife, well, we all know how that ended." Elias said nothing for a long while. He was very good at silence, especially the kind that left other people filling in the blanks with whatever assumptions suited them. He didn't need to accuse. He just had to let the town do what it always did, choose safety over truth, comfort over confrontation. Finally, he spoke. "I took Harper in when she had no one, gave her food, shelter, faith. I believed I was healing a soul." He let the pause linger, then added softly, "But sometimes when you cast out darkness, it finds another place to hide." There were murmurs of agreement. Heads nodded. Some muttered, "Amen." And just like that, the town was reminded of who they'd rather trust, the man in the pulpit, not the girl with the bruised voice. Owen didn't go to church, hadn't stepped foot in the sanctuary since the funeral. But that night, he stood on Elias Wynne's porch. The door opened slowly, revealing the Reverend in his usual crisp shirt and subtle smile. "Owen Elias," said surprise, quickly giving way to a composed welcome. "I didn't expect we need to talk," Owen cut in. Elias stepped aside, motioning him in. "Would you like tea? Coffee? I'm not here for hospitality." They sat across from each other in the Reverend's study, wood-paneled walls, shelves of theological volumes, a framed verse above the fireplace. "Perfect love casts out fear." Owen glanced at it, then back at the man in front of him. "You know why I'm here." Elias didn't blink. "You've taken in a very troubled young woman, Owen, and now she's stirred division in this community. She's not the one who divided anything," Owen said. "She just stopped pretending." Elias folded his hands, voice smooth. "We all carry burdens. That doesn't give us the right to burn down the house because we're cold." "It's not your house," Owen snapped. "It never was. You just convinced everyone they had to live in it." A beat passed, then another. The fire crackled in the hearth. Elias leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You think you're saving her?" he said softly. "But broken girls cling to the first man who shows them kindness. It's not salvation. It's transference." Owen stood slowly. His voice when he spoke was low and hard. "Maybe she is broken. Maybe I am too. But at least I know the difference between holding someone up and holding them hostage." Elias rose too, his composure cracking. "You're playing with fire, Owen," I know Owen said. "And this time, I'm not walking away from it." He left without another word. Back at the forge, Harper was reading by the stove legs curled beneath her. Noah asleep nearby with a coloring book still open on his chest. When Owen walked in, he looked at her for a long time. She looked up. What did he say? Owen took off his coat, hung it by the door. He said, "You're dangerous." Harper gave a bitter smile. "I've been called worse." "He's scared," Owen added. "Scared because you're not silent anymore." She blinked. "I'm still scared." "That's okay," Owen said. "Courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and showing up anyway." She stared at him, her eyes filled with something heavy and beautiful. Then quietly, When I was little, I used to imagine there was a bench somewhere, a real one, where I could sit and not be afraid, where no one would ask me to explain why I needed to sit. It sounds stupid now." Owen shook his head. Not stupid at all. He crossed the room, pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket and handed it to her. It was the blueprint for a bench carved rounded, strong, simple, but with something new, a hidden compartment beneath the seat, and a phrase etched into the backrest. She read the words aloud. "A place to sit without shame." Her hand trembled. "I'm going to build it tomorrow," Owen said. "But only if you help me." Harper looked down at the drawing, then at him. She nodded. "I'll bring the tools." That night, Harper couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because for the first time in years, she was building something. Not just a bench, but a story, a truth, and maybe a home. The forge was quiet in the early dawn, bathed in pale orange from the coals that still glowed faintly from the night before. Outside, frost clung to every window pane like a ghost refusing to let go. Inside, Harper rolled up her sleeves. The workbench smelled of cedar and soot. Tools were laid out neatly, chisel, mallet, sanding block all waiting. Owen stood across from her hands, already blackened with dust, the wood for the new bench stacked beside him like a promise. No words were spoken for the first hour, only rhythm, tap, sand, breathe. It wasn't silence, it was music. Harper had never built anything before. Not really. Her hands were always too busy folding laundry, arranging hymnals, or serving coffee to men who didn't look her in the eye. But this was hers. She measured each line twice, smoothed every surface with care. And with each stroke, she felt something inside her begin to align, not just healing, agency. By midday, the base of the bench stood complete, raw, and unpolished, but solid. Owen wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his forearm. "You've got a good eye," he said. "I've had practice watching people." Harper replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's how I survived. Now you're doing more than surviving." She paused, then whispered, "I'm not sure I know how." Owen turned to face her. "You don't need to know how. You just need to believe you can." Harper's eyes flicked down to the floor. "I used to believe," she said quietly. "A long time ago. That evening after Noah had gone to bed, and the bench was carefully covered in burlap. Harper lingered near the stove, something clenched in her hands. Owen saw her standing there still, as stone eyes fixed on the firelight. He approached softly. "What is it?" She held it up, a small, battered Bible. The leather binding cracked the spine, nearly torn. Owen recognized it instantly. "That's his, isn't it?" Harper nodded. "He gave it to me when I turned 12. Said it was the only book I'd ever need. Said it was holy." She turned it over in her hands like a fragile bone, but he used it like a chain. Owen didn't move, didn't speak. He waited. "I used to sleep with it under my pillow," she continued, "because I thought if I didn't, I'd go to hell. That's what he told me. That love had to hurt to mean something." Then she met Owen's eyes. "But your love never hurt." Owen's chest tightened. "I'm not sure I know what love is anymore," he said honestly. Harper half laughed. "Then maybe that's what makes you the safest person I've ever known." She stepped closer to the fire. "I want to burn it." Owen didn't flinch. "Then burn it." "No judgment?" "None." She hesitated, held it tighter. Then slowly, deliberately, she knelt by the hearth, opened the stove's iron door, and laid the Bible on the flames. It didn't catch right away. The old leather smoldered reluctant. But then the pages curled inward, like fingers folding in prayer, and the ink bled into light. Harper sat back on her heels watching it burn. Tears streamed down her face, but not from sorrow, from release. Owen crouched beside her. "You know," he said quietly, "books burn. But truth survives." Harper nodded. This wasn't truth. It was control dressed up in verses. She stared at the flames until there was nothing left but ash. And then she whispered the same words again this time, not in fear, but as a vow love shouldn't hurt. Later that night, Owen brought out a bottle of old apple cider he'd been saving since the day Noah was born. They sat on the porch under thick blankets, the stars clear above them, their breath rising in soft clouds. Harper took a slow sip. "I never asked," she said, "what happened to your wife." Owen stared into the dark trees. She was kind. Too kind, maybe. A teacher. She taught at the elementary school. Harper listened. She believed in kids, believed they could ask questions, even hard ones. That's what got her in trouble. He paused, swallowed. She taught a unit on empathy, brought in books about families that looked different, parents of the same gender, kids who'd been adopted. Some folks didn't like that. Harper's face darkened. "Let me guess. Your church didn't either. They said she was poisoning the children. The board asked her to resign. The parents turned on her. Even friends we'd had for years stopped answering the phone." He exhaled. "I kept telling her it would pass, that they'd come around. And she died, waiting," Harper said softly. Owen nodded. "She left me a note. Said she didn't want to be a burden. That she didn't want to raise Noah in a town that called kindness rebellion." Harper closed her eyes. She was right. "But I was wrong," Owen said. "I thought silence would protect us, that staying quiet was safer than standing up." He looked at Harper. "I'm done being quiet." They sat in silence for a long time, the fire inside crackling gently. Then Harper reached for his hand. Not romantic, not needy, just real. "I think she'd be proud of you," she whispered. Owen squeezed her fingers gently. "I think she'd be proud of you too." Inside the workshop, the bench waited. Unpainted, unfinished, but strong. The next morning, they would carve the words that would outlast whispers. And this time, this truth, no one would burn. The next morning brought an eerie calm. The air was still the clouds low, and the town of North Haven moved slowly beneath a gray sky, as if it too was holding its breath. In the forge, Owen and Harper stood side by side, their hands coated in sawdust and linseed oil. The bench was almost complete. The curves were smooth, the joints snug. All that remained now was the inscription. Harper ran her fingers along the top plank, the grain warm beneath her touch. "Are you sure?" Owen asked. She looked at him. Her eyes were steady, clearer than he'd ever seen. "I don't want to whisper anymore, Owen. Not if I can carve." They worked quietly for hours, etching each letter by hand, with care and precision. Harper insisted on doing the first word herself. She traced it with a pencil first. Then, gripping the chisel tight, she pressed into the wood. The blade caught bit deep and shaved away a sliver of cedar. Her breath hitched, but she didn't stop. Letter by letter, the phrase emerged, firm and permanent, a place to sit without shame. When they finished, Harper stepped back and stared at it as though it were a mirror. And in that reflection, she didn't see the scared, obedient girl raised to apologize for her own breath. She saw a woman who had finally spoken. Later that afternoon, the bench was placed outside the forge, beneath the old pine tree facing the town square. Owen positioned it carefully, then stepped away as Harper knelt beside it and tucked a folded letter into a small hollow beneath the seat. "What's in the letter?" he asked. "My story," she said simply. "Not a confession, just the truth. You want someone to find it. I want someone to feel less alone when they do." The news of the bench spread fast. By sundown, people had already begun to pass by, pretending not to read the words carved into the backrest. Some turned away quickly. Others lingered just long enough for the words to settle under their skin. One woman, older, with graying curls and eyes the color of storm clouds, stopped in front of the bench for nearly 10 minutes before sitting down. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She just exhaled. And Harper, watching from the forge, did too, but not everyone approved. The next morning, 2 letters were slipped under Owen's workshop door. One was from the church council politely suggesting he remove the provocative bench before it caused further division. The second was unsigned. It read, "If you're so proud of what you built, why don't you let God judge you in his house?" Harper read it and rolled her eyes. So now benches are the enemy. It's not the bench Owen said. It's what it makes them feel. Guilt fear. Harper nodded. Well, let them be afraid. I've lived afraid long enough. But later that day, Harper received a very different kind of message. She was helping Noah arrange books on the shelf when the shop bell jingled. A boy no older than 16 entered, quiet, thin, with trembling fingers and hollow cheeks. He approached the bench outside, sat slowly, then reached beneath it. He pulled out Harper's letter. She moved to stop him, but something in Owen's eyes held her back. The boy read it right there, lips moving silently. When he finished, he folded it carefully and placed it back exactly where he'd found it. Then he stood turned and looked directly at Harper through the window. His voice was soft, but carried. "Thank you." Then he walked away. Harper didn't realize she was crying until Noah handed her a clean rag from the workbench. "I liked that kid," Noah said. "He looked like he needed to sit." That evening, Harper finally spoke the words she had once buried. She and Owen sat at the dinner table, Noah upstairs, with a book, the fire warming the walls around them. "I was 16 when he first touched me." She began, voice low but unwavering. "He said it was love, that obedience was proof of faith, that I was special, chosen." Owen didn't interrupt. I knew it was wrong, but he convinced me wrong and wholly could live in the same place. That pain meant purification. Her hands were clenched around her tea mug. I wanted to tell someone, anyone. But in this town, people don't believe girls like me, especially not when the man wears a collar and knows scripture by heart. Owen's jaw tightened. "I'm so sorry, Harper." "You don't have to be sorry," she said. "You just have to stay." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." She let out a slow breath. For years, I thought if I said it out loud, the world would collapse, that lightning would strike. But now that I've said it, "What do you feel?" Owen asked. She looked at him. A long pause. Hungry. They both laughed. And in that laughter was something sacred. That night, Harper added a second letter to the bench. Tucked beside the first, this one was simpler. "To the one who needs to speak but can't yet, I see you. I waited too. You're not alone." She sealed it in wax, and when she placed it beneath the bench, her hands didn't shake. Not even a little. It started with whispers. By Monday morning, they had sharpened into something colder. Outside the forge, someone had scrawled, "Shame shelter" in chalk across the sidewalk. 2 broken eggs lay cracked near the bench, their yolks frozen in the frost, like tiny, unblinking eyes. Owen swept the mess in silence, while Harper stood inside watching through the window. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just folded her arms tightly across her chest, as if holding herself in place. At the diner, they stopped serving Owen his usual. At the market, Harper heard the murmured phrase as she walked past the produce aisle. "That's the girl." At the school, Noah was shoved during recess. Not hard, but hard enough to send a message. "Your dad hides broken girls," one boy sneered. "Maybe she touches him too." Noah didn't hit back. He just looked the boy in the eye and said, My dad fixes what other people break. The teachers said they'd look into it. But no one really did. That evening, Owen paced the workshop. Jaw clenched, the same loop of anger winding through him over and over again. "Maybe we should take a break," he muttered. "Leave town for a bit. Let it die down." Harper, seated quietly by the window, didn't answer at first. Finally she spoke. "That's what they want." Owen stopped. "I'm tired, Harper. I'm tired of fighting a wall that won't move." She stood, walked over to him, and placed a hand on his arm. "You're not the one they're really fighting, Owen. I am. Me. My story. My voice." She swallowed. "And I've been silent long enough." That night, she pulled a notebook from the drawer and began to write. Every page, every line, her voice unfiltered. The things no one had asked. The parts of herself she thought she'd buried for good. The nights she cried into a pillow, thinking maybe it really was her fault. The Sundays she wore long sleeves even in the summer. The mornings she looked in the mirror and wondered how much of herself she'd have to lose before she was clean again. She wrote it all. When she finished, she didn't hide it. She walked into town the next morning and pinned the pages typed, printed, and signed with her name on the church's notice board. Then she walked away. By noon, the town was split. Some called it brave. Others called it betrayal. Reverend Elias Wynne stood at the pulpit that evening, holding the letter as if it were a snake. "I have served this town for 25 years, he declared, "and never, never has my name been smeared with such poison." The congregation sat rigid. Some looked at their feet. A few looked at each other. Only one person stood. It was Mrs. Ellie Watkins, 73 years old, retired nurse, and the only woman in town who had buried both a daughter and a secret. She cleared her throat. "You may have served this town, Reverend, but not all of us felt served." Gasps echoed through the pews. Reverend Wynne's face went pale. Another woman stood. Then a third, and a fourth. Each silent, each holding a page of Harper's story, now printed and passed by hand. The silence cracked like stained glass, and then it shattered. That night, the bench outside the forge had visitors, not vandals, women, one by one. Some sat, some stood nearby, some didn't speak, but they came. Harper watched from the porch, wrapped in her shawl, heart aching in a way that wasn't pain, but something close. Owen stepped beside her, holding 2 mugs of tea. "They're here for you," he said. Harper shook her head. "They're here for themselves." Inside, Noah was coloring at the table when he looked up and asked Dad, "Why are people mad at Miss Harper?" Owen sat beside him. "Because she told the truth, and sometimes the truth makes people scared." "Why would anyone be scared of the truth?" Owen smiled sadly. "Because once you know it, you have to choose what to do with it." Later that night, Harper found a letter in the mailbox, unsigned, scrawled in nervous handwriting. "I believe you. I just didn't know how to say it before. I was 12. His breath smelled like peppermint." Harper folded it carefully. She added it to a box in the corner of the workshop, one they'd started calling the box of the unspoken. It was almost full now. As they locked up the forge for the night, Harper looked at Owen. "They turned their backs on me," she said. And now she paused, then answered with something that surprised them both. "Now they have to face me." Owen nodded slowly. "And are you ready for that?" Harper smiled. Not soft, not shy. Strong. "I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't know it yet." And in the quiet that followed, even the wind seemed to hush, as if North Haven for once was listening. The church bell rang at 9:00 a.m., sharp as it always had. Its clang echoed over North Haven like tradition itself, familiar, unquestioned, heavy. The townsfolk filed in, dressed in their finest coats, hymnals tucked under arms. No one spoke of the letter on the notice board anymore, not out loud. But the tension hung in the sanctuary like smoke. Reverend Elias Wynne stood behind the pulpit, calm as ever. His Bible lay open, bookmarked and worn. His hands rested on either side of it, like a judge prepared to deliver sentence. I know many of you have heard rumors. He began, voice smooth as silk, and seen claims meant to sow doubt and division. No one moved. He looked across the room and said softly, "But in times of confusion, we must ask, who do we trust? The voice of God or the voice of scandal?" And that's when the back doors opened. Heads turned. Harper Wynne stepped into the aisle, her hair pulled back, wearing the same navy blue dress she used to wear to church as a child, though now it hung differently. Less like a uniform, more like armor. Every eye followed her as she walked steadily toward the front. Not rushed, not defiant, just certain. She reached the foot of the altar. Reverend Wynne looked down at her, a flicker of tension tightening his jaw. "Harper," he said, a thread of warning laced beneath his tone. "This isn't the time." "It is," she replied. "It's the only time." He hesitated. "We are in the middle of a sermon. Then let me testify." The room stilled. Someone whispered, "Let her speak." Elias backed away half a step. "Just one. Enough." Harper turned to face the congregation. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "For 10 years I sat in this church. I sang the hymns. I bowed my head. I smiled when I was hurting, and I thanked a man who made me believe pain was my fault." There was a ripple of gasps. Someone dropped their bulletin. A few looked down immediately, unable to meet her gaze. "I was told obedience was love. That suffering made me holy. And I believed it. Because when you grow up in silence, you think pain is just part of the worship." Her voice cracked, but she didn't falter. "I didn't come here today to accuse. I came to free myself. And maybe to free someone else who's still stuck in the pews afraid to speak." A woman in the third row, Ellie Watkins, again nodded, slowly, hands folded over her lap. Harper took a breath. "I wrote my story down because I was done waiting for permission to heal. But today, I say it out loud, because healing deserves to echo." She turned, slightly, eyes scanning the sanctuary. "If you've ever wondered why someone like me didn't come forward sooner, let me tell you, it's not because I didn't want to. It's because I thought I'd be alone." Another pause. "But I'm not." At the back of the room, the church doors opened again. Owen stepped inside. Noah trailed behind him, holding Harper's handwritten statement, now reprinted on clean white pages. One by one, people stood. Mrs. Ellie Watkins, the teenage boy from the bench. 2 women who hadn't spoken to each other in 20 years, but had both left church early the day Harper's story went up on the bulletin. They formed a quiet line down the aisle. Elias tried to speak. "This is not how we resolve." "No," Owen said, stepping forward. "This is exactly how we resolve it. By standing when no one else will." Harper looked to Elias one last time. He stood, frozen eyes darting not in defiance now, but in disbelief. The power had shifted, and he felt it. The rest of the service never happened. No benediction, no closing hymn. Just silence as people walked out, some quickly, some slowly, but all changed. Outside, the winter sun had pushed through the clouds, bathing the church steps in gold. Owen and Harper stood together as others passed, some offering nods, a few still avoiding their eyes. But more than one paused to say, "Thank you." A girl no older than 16 clutched Harper's hand and whispered, "You made me brave." Harper knelt and whispered back, "You already were." That afternoon, Harper returned to the bench outside the forge. She sat alone for a moment, her hands clasped in her lap, feeling the carved words against her back, a place to sit without shame. A little boy walked by with his mother staring at the bench with curiosity. "She built that," the woman said gently. The boy stared wide-eyed. Why, Harper smiled. Because sometimes the best way to tell your story is to make a place for someone else to tell theirs. The mother nodded. The boy beamed. They walked on. Inside the forge, Owen was finishing another bench. The requests had started coming in that morning from people who wanted benches outside their shops, their homes, even their churches. Not as protest, as testimony. He looked up as Harper stepped inside. "You were brave today," he said. She shook her head. "I was loud today. I've been brave for a long time. I just stopped hiding it." He handed her a chisel. "You want to carve this one?" She took it, gripping the worn handle in her hand. "What should it say?" she asked. Owen smiled. "Whatever you want them to remember." Harper turned the plank toward the light. She began to carve slowly, carefully, with hands that no longer trembled. And as the first letter took shape, so did something else. A beginning. The forge smelled like cedar iron and warm bread. Outside, the late winter sun slanted low across the horizon, spilling golden light over the town square, where the new bench stood under the pine tree. But now, it wasn't alone. 2 more benches had joined it. One came from Ellie Watkins, who insisted on paying Owen in cash and oatmeal cookies. The other came from the North Haven bookshop, whose owner, a soft-spoken man named Tom, had quietly placed a folded poem beneath the seat. A place to rest, not to be judged. A place where the spine bends, but not the spirit. Each day more benches appeared. No fanfare, no press. Just wood and honesty carved by hands that had run out of excuses for staying silent. Harper had taken to working in the forge every morning, always beside Owen, but never behind him. She was no longer a guest. She was home. On the 9th morning since the service, she arrived earlier than usual, carrying a small cardboard box. "What's that?" Owen asked, setting down his hammer. Harper smiled and opened the flaps, revealing dozens of folded letters, some typed, some handwritten, some barely legible through smudged pencil and trembling pen. "They came in the mail," she said. "From people who read the story. From here. From other towns. Even one from Vermont." Owen picked up the top letter and read a single line aloud. "You helped me name the thing I've been afraid of since I was 13. He set it down slower than he'd picked it up. "What are you going to do with them?" Harper paused. "I was thinking, what if we made a wall? A wall. Not to block anything out," she said, "but to hold things up. Stories, truths, even the ones that hurt." Owen grinned. "You want to build a cathedral of scars?" Harper blinked, then laughed. "Yes, exactly that." That afternoon they began framing out the side wall of the workshop, replacing the worn wood paneling with planks wide enough to hold messages. Harper called it the listening wall. Each letter was sealed behind glass labeled only with initials and a date, unless the writer wanted their name shown. Some told of quiet abuses that stretched decades. Others described fears that no longer had teeth. A few simply said, "Thank you." They hung them side by side without hierarchy. Every voice equal. By the 3rd day, people stopped by just to read. Some cried. Some lit candles. One man brought a bouquet of violets and set it beneath the panel labeled L.W. March, 1976. No one asked. No one had to. Meanwhile, the church attendance dropped. Reverend Elias Wynne still preached every Sunday, but the pews were thinning. The choir sang louder to fill the gaps. The bulletins were folded tighter. And yet, the silence was thicker than ever. Rumors said Elias had offered to step down. Others said he refused, insisting that Harper's accusations were a test of faith and that he would endure the fire. Harper didn't respond. She didn't need to. The benches and the wall were her reply. One evening, Noah found Harper sketching a new design at the table. "What's this one?" he asked. "It's for the school," she said. I thought maybe they could use a bench, too. A place where kids could sit when they didn't have the words. Noah's brow furrowed. Like if they're sad or confused, or lonely, or scared. He looked at her seriously. "We should make it red." "Red?" "Yeah, like a lighthouse." Harper stared at him for a long moment. "You're a smart kid, you know that." He beamed. "You keep saying that, because it keeps being true." That weekend, the school's front lawn welcomed a small red bench, polished and perfect. The plaque on its side read, "If you need a place to feel, sit here." By Monday, a girl sat on it with tears in her eyes. A boy joined her and didn't say a word. No one mocked them. They just let them be. That same week, a letter came addressed to Owen. No return address. He opened it slowly. Inside was a typed note. "You've ruined everything. She was my responsibility. I was shaping her soul. You think you've saved her. You've only given her a place to hide." Owen folded the letter carefully and handed it to Harper. She read it once, then again. Then, without comment, she walked outside, held the paper to the flame of a candle on the porch, and watched it curl into ash. When Owen stepped beside her, she said only, "It's funny. He still thinks he owns something that was never his." That night, they shared dinner around the fire. Noah between them, the forge behind them, and the stars spread wide overhead. No grand speeches, no epiphanies, just warmth, just peace, just the knowledge that somehow the ones who stayed were enough. And for the first time, Harper didn't look over her shoulder. She looked forward. Spring arrived in North Haven slowly, like someone learning how to trust again. The snow melted away in pieces, first from the roofs, then from the shaded sidewalks, then finally from the corners of the town square. The earth beneath the benches began to breathe again, soft and forgiving, as if thawed not just by sunlight, but by something deeper acknowledgement. At the forge, the scent of fresh-cut cedar replaced the harsh tang of smoke and steel. Owen and Harper worked in sync, their movements seamless now. They didn't speak as much during the day. They didn't need to. Every strike of the hammer, every stroke of the chisel was its own kind of language. One Saturday morning, Harper sat alone on the original bench, the one outside the forge, the one that started it all. Her fingers traced the carved inscription absently, "A place to sit without shame." She closed her eyes. It still amazed her how solid the wood felt beneath her, how something so vulnerable, so exposed to weather and judgment could remain strong, could hold her weight without flinching. Noah came bounding down the steps, his backpack bouncing with every stride. Ready, he grinned, waving the folded poster board. Harper smiled. "You sure you want me there?" Noah gave her a look that only a child could pull off, part indignant, part amused. "You helped build it." "Of course I do." Owen emerged from the forge, wiping sawdust off his hands. "Bus leaves in 20. Let's not be late for your big moment." The school courtyard was buzzing with kids and parents by the time they arrived. Colorful balloons lined the pathway to the small red bench, the lighthouse bench, as Noah had called it. Beside it stood a cork board titled "Words That Matter," already pinned with crayon drawings and index cards scribbled in wobbly handwriting. "This bench is magic." "I sat here when my dog died. I made a friend on this bench." Harper read them slowly, heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years. Pride that wasn't rooted in survival, but in purpose. The principal stepped up to the microphone and tapped it gently. "I want to thank Noah Blake," she said, "and his family for reminding us that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is offer someone a place to be." Noah stood tall, gripping his poster board like a shield. He looked at Harper, eyes sparkling. She's the one who made the first bench he set into the mic, and my dad fixed it, but it was her idea to help people feel better when they sit. Everyone turned to look at Harper. She froze until Owen placed his hand on the small of her back. "Let them see you," he whispered. She stepped forward just enough to meet the crowd's gaze. No applause came, but something better did. A girl in the 3rd grade stood, walked to the red bench, and sat. A boy joined her shoulders tense. She took his hand, and he let her. That night, Harper found herself walking the old path toward the edge of town, toward the white church that had once been her cage. It stood the same as always, white siding, dark roof windows trimmed in perfection. But now it looked smaller, somehow. Less certain. Elias Wynne had left the pulpit 2 weeks earlier on sabbatical, though most knew it was resignation in softer words. No formal apology had ever come. But Harper hadn't waited for one. She walked past the front steps down the side of the building to the place where years ago she used to sneak outside just to breathe. The bench that once sat there, the one she remembered cracking beneath her weight, was gone. In its place, someone had planted wildflowers. Harper knelt and touched the petals. They were delicate, but thriving. Back at the forge, Owen was locking up when he saw her return. "Good walk?" he asked. Harper nodded. "I said goodbye to something." "You want to talk about it?" "No," she smiled gently. "But thank you for asking." They stood there in the golden haze of early evening. Noah sat on the porch, humming a tune he'd made up himself, carving small shapes into a scrap of wood with his father's old penknife. Harper watched him for a moment, then turned to Owen. "Do you think it's strange that something as simple as a bench could change everything Owen thought for a beat? I think sometimes the smallest kindness opens the biggest door." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to think healing had to be dramatic, loud. Now I think maybe it's just finally being able to sit somewhere without pain." "That's what love is," Owen murmured. "Not fireworks, not rescue, just someone who makes room beside them." They didn't kiss. They didn't have to. They just stood there, side by side, 2 people who had learned through fire and fracture how to build something strong enough to hold them both. Later that night, Harper returned to the original bench one last time. She tucked a new letter beneath the seat, sealed in a hand-carved wooden box. It read, "If you're here because it still hurts, know this. It won't always. And when you're ready to stand, someone will be sitting here waiting." She smiled, her hand resting on the backrest. "Thank you," she whispered. And for the first time, it wasn't a plea. It was a benediction, a beginning. Spring in North Haven arrived like a secret, slowly shared soft rains, quiet sunrises, and the sweet perfume of wild lilac drifting down Main Street. The town had not forgotten what happened that winter, but it had stopped pretending it didn't matter. And that Harper thought was enough. It had been 6 months since the first bench went up outside the forge. Now there were more than 20 scattered throughout the town outside shops, schools, even the town hall. Each one carried a phrase carved with care, some tender, some fierce, all true. "Sit here if your voice still shakes. You don't owe anyone your silence. You matter, even when it's quiet." Harper had stopped counting. She'd also stopped hiding. She and Owen had never discussed the word love. Not in the way others did. There had been no declarations, no cinematic moments beneath moonlight. But each morning he handed her coffee just the way she liked it. One sugar splash of cream, and each evening she reminded him to rest his wrist when it flared up from hammering. And when Noah got the flu in late March, they both took turns reading to him and sleeping in shifts on the floor beside his bed. Love, she realized, wasn't a moment. It was a rhythm. And for the first time in her life, she was dancing in time. On the first Sunday of May, Harper received a letter postmarked from another state. It was from Reverend Elias Wynne. She opened it slowly, hand steady but heart conflicted. The handwriting was formal, impersonal. Harper, I hope this letter finds you in peace. I've been in quiet reflection these past months. I can't undo what I've done. I won't ask forgiveness, not yet. That's not mine to claim. But I want you to know, I read your words, every one of them, and they broke me in ways I needed to break. I am no longer a pastor. I'm simply a man learning what that means. I wish you light. D.W. She read it once, then again, and then gently she placed it in the fire. Not out of bitterness, out of choice. That afternoon, Harper and Owen took Noah out to the meadow just beyond the edge of town. It was where his mother used to go when she needed quiet, a rolling stretch of wildflowers and sky untouched by fences or judgment. Owen carried a new bench in the back of his truck. This one wasn't for a storefront or school. It was for her. Not Harper. Noah's mother. The woman whose quiet courage had laid the first foundation even before any wood had been cut. They placed the bench under the old oak tree at the top of the hill. It faced the valley where the wind danced freely, where no one watched unless they meant to see. Harper ran her hand across the finished surface. There were no carved words this time. Just a brass plaque, small and simple for the one who saw first. Noah pressed his hand to it. She would have liked this, he whispered. Owen nodded. She would have liked you more. Harper smiled and stood beside them, quiet as the wind. Back at the forge, Harper found a small package on the workbench. Inside was a journal. On the first page, Owen had written, "You've given this town more than it deserved. Now give something to yourself. Write the story only you can tell." Below it, a blank page. She opened to the second. Blank again. She ran her fingers across the paper. For once, the blankness didn't intimidate her. It invited her. She picked up a pen and wrote. Chapter 1. I was not made to be quiet, and smiled. Weeks passed. Summer came early that year, and with it, laughter returned to North Haven, not all at once, but in slow, sincere echoes. The forge began selling small carvings made by Harper and Noah. People asked for benches with names, dedications, even prayers, not the old kind, but the honest kind. Harper became more than the girl they whispered about. She was the woman who stayed, who spoke, who built something better when everything else had broken. One evening in July, Harper sat outside on the bench beneath the pine tree, the first one, the one that had started it all. Owen joined her as he always did. They watched as a young woman Harper didn't know walked hesitantly toward the bench, paused, then sat beside them. The woman didn't say anything. She just took a deep breath, pressed her hands into her lap, and let herself be still. After a while, Harper asked gently, "Do you want to talk?" The girl shook her head. "No," she whispered. But I needed to know there was somewhere I could sit. Harper nodded, a soft smile forming. Then that's enough. As the sun dipped below the trees, the town quieted into evening. And the bench, it stayed. Not as a monument, not as a protest, but as a promise. A place where pain didn't disqualify you from peace, where healing wasn't rushed, where stories, even the broken ones, were welcome. Harper looked out over her town, still flawed, still learning, still growing, and with her feet planted firmly on the ground, and her heart finally light, she whispered the words she had waited years to say, "I'm not hurting anymore." Not because the pain had vanished, but because she had built a place where it could finally rest. And in that stillness, she healed. And sometimes, healing doesn't come with thunder or applause. It comes quietly, like a bench placed in the right spot, like someone who finally says, I believe you. If this story touched something in your heart, we'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Leave us a comment and share your corner of the world, because even across miles, kindness connects us. And if you'd like more stories, like this, stories of hope, courage, and the quiet strength that changes lives, consider subscribing. Just a small click, but it means the world to us. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never underestimate the power of simply staying.